He knew my ride before I even booked it. I didn't understand what that meant the first time it happened. It felt like one of those tiny, harmless coincidences you brush off until it starts bending everything around it. I've always been the kind of person who double-checks things. Tire pressure, spare kit, a pen that never writes. I drove nights because I preferred silence over traffic, and because the late-night crowd tipped better when you let them talk long enough to forget their problems. Nights made me alert. Not paranoid, just alert. There's a difference. At least, there used to be. Before I tell you the rest, stay with me. If you like stories that don't feel like stories, stories that feel like someone breathing on your shoulder, don't click away. I've got 4 encounters that all connect, and if you're anything like me, one detail is going to stick with you longer than you want it to. The night this started, I had taken an extra shift. The bar stayed open past 2, and I stayed long enough to wipe down tables, refill napkins, listen to the last drunks apologize to no one. By the time I stepped outside, the fog had swallowed the streetlights. I remember thinking it looked like the city was exhaling something it shouldn't. I didn't want to drive home. My car was in the shop anyway, so I used a rideshare app. Nothing complicated. One click, a soft chime, a little blue sedan icon creeping toward me on the map. The kind of thing you don't even think about. And then the driver arrived. He didn't look wrong, just out of place. Tall, coat buttoned all the way to his chin, a faint smell of winter cologne, and something sterile, like a hospital elevator. He slipped into the back seat without a sound. And then he said it. "You drive a green Corolla, right? The one with the dent on the rear bumper?" He didn't say it like a question. He said it like he'd known me for years. I froze. "No," I told him. "I'm not driving tonight. My car's in the shop." He didn't react, didn't even look at me. "Ah, must be mixing you up," he murmured, like he was reading a script he'd already memorized. I should have asked more questions. Instead, I sat there replaying the sentence in my head, trying to bend it into something normal. That's when he pushed a folded piece of paper onto the seat beside me. "If you ever take that car back," he said quietly, "don't park under the lamp by the bakery. You won't like what waits there when it rains." That's the moment, the exact second my stomach dropped. Because he didn't say it like a threat or a warning. He said it like a courtesy, like he was doing me a favor. There are details you remember because they make sense, and there are details you remember because they absolutely don't. That slip of paper was the second kind. Inside was an address, a street I'd driven past 100 times, and something handwritten, "Not where you think." We sat in silence after that. Not awkward, not tense, just wrong. He talked a little about working nights, his sister living near me, how he ordered his rides through a third-party company. It was all filler, all noise to bury the one thing he'd already said. When we reached my building, I tried to hand him cash, but he waved it off. He left a folded bill on the seat anyway. "Keep your light on when you park," he said as he opened the door. "People notice when cars are easy targets." And then the fog took him. I didn't see his face, not once. I took the next rest stop. I killed the engine. The silence was immediate. The van rolled past the lot without stopping. I sat there with the keys in my hand, feeling stupid for being jumpy. I told myself the van wanted the same highway exit, and that was that. Then my phone buzzed in the glove box, a text from an unknown number. "You're heading to the old hall tonight," it read. "Black truck with dented fender. Be careful on the gravel by the east entrance." I stared at the message until the letters blurred. The truck behind us, the white van, had driven past the rest stop at the exact moment my phone pinged. There was no signal trace, no registered number. I called dispatch, told them what was happening. They said to be cautious, to park near people, to call if anything escalated. The company gave me a sympathetic tone, like they were cushioning responsibility. They told me to use the front entrance, that it had lights, that people would be around. When I pulled into the hall, the lot was mostly empty. A single orange cone marked a patch of fresh asphalt. I parked at the front, engine warm, hands steepled on the wheel. The east entrance, where they'd told me to watch the gravel, had a shadow curled in it. A man in a dark hoodie hunched there, hands in pockets. I felt cold despite the heat cranked in the cab. I locked the doors before I climbed out. I took the cooler down the path and heard that crunch of gravel before I saw him step out. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He leaned against the entrance and watched me like someone reading a page they'd memorized. "You must be the driver," he said, and his voice was that clinical mix of observation and boredom. "Black truck with dent above the wheel. Thought you'd be early." When I asked how he knew, he shrugged. "Been watching the road a while." He didn't force anything. He didn't need to. The cooler clinked in my hands like a metronome. He told me where to put the food and left as quietly as he had appeared. Later, when I checked the truck, someone had left a smear of mud on the rear bumper and a small blood stain on the step. Not deep, not explicit, just enough to make the palms sweat. I called the boss. He filed an incident report, told me to take the truck for inspection. The police took notes, asked the same routine questions that always feel thin at the center. No suspects, no cameras. The man in the hoodie became a piece of neighborhood gossip. Some said he was a drifter who liked to watch roads. Some said he was a lookout for thieves. My coworker, Ramon, said, "You always had a knack for picking weird nights to work." He laughed like he meant comfort. I didn't laugh. The third time, it happened closer to home and closer to the kind of intimacy that unsettles you because it invades your space. I had a night off and I took the slow route back from my parents. The county road that runs behind their property is lined with sugar maples and, at night, you can see your breath hanging like small ghosts. I had that windows down, song on, driving alone feeling. It was one of those nights where the world reduces to taillights and the hum of tires. Up ahead, a figure stood under a street lamp that didn't seem to exist on any map. Not on my side, not by the fence. He was thin, coat flapping like a moth's wing. He raised his hand as I slowed. Most people hitchhiking that late were luckier or more desperate. I rolled down my window and he said, plainly, "You always park at 12 by the sycamore." I blinked. That was my spot on my parents' driveway when I'd come to visit late, under the sycamore at the end of the lane. I didn't remember telling anyone that. I remembered being small and hiding my bike there. I asked him how he knew. He tilted his head. "Been watching," he said. "You leave your lights on sometimes. Easy to find." There was something about the way he said, "easy to find," that stopped conversation. I told him I didn't need a ride and I drove on. The mirror held him for a minute, a dark silhouette in a pale pool of light. Then the distance swallowed him. I didn't sleep that night. I checked the porch, the sycamore, the lane. My father joked the next morning about me being followed by ghosts of my teenage life. He didn't joke for long when he found a smear on the trunk of my car, a handprint in something dark and sticky, smeared as if someone had braced themselves against it. I reported it because you do the sensible thing. The officer who came by had a slow voice and a careful look. "Could be anything," he said. "Kids playing around, your nephew got into the jar of paint." He meant well. He left a card and a promise to add it to the log. The handprint was cleaned off before noon. The uneasy feeling wasn't. Between these incidents, I tried to rationalize. Maybe the men were criminals with a sense for habitual routine. Maybe I had a quiet life and it left patterns that were obvious to anyone paying attention. But the next one felt like a direct step into a script I didn't want to star in. One summer, I took a job driving a client to the airport at an hour when the sky was still clinging to that in-between color, neither night nor morning. The client's name was Mr. Ellison. Middle-aged, somber, carrying a leather briefcase with corners worn to softness. He didn't look like someone who knew where I parked 3 times a week. We drove in silence at first. Then he asked what I did for a living. I told him, as I tended to, bartender, occasional delivery driver, long nights. He nodded like he understood missing daylight. "Do you ever worry about being observed?" he asked suddenly. "It's part of the job," I said. "People notice patterns, people notice cars." He smiled like the hint landed on the right note. "Patterns," he said again. "They're very informative. The car you drive, green Corolla, dent on the rear bumper. I saw it once on Elm. You always leave your light on when you park." I almost laughed at that. He ended up being brutally literal. He was the kind of man who could name a neighbor's dog from a single window's reflection. I told him he had me mixed up. He folded his hands and said, "You can test me. Where do you park the most when you're home?" I told him, embarrassed, the exact spot. He turned and wrote something in his notebook. A week later, I got a message from a friend who did odd jobs for the city transit department. "There was a report," she said. "Someone's been walking routes quietly and noting houses with cars parked in certain spots. They think it's for targeting. Insurance scams, perhaps? They found lists. The lists had addresses and car descriptions and little notes. Leaves light on. Leaves glove box open. Works nights. No names. The tone of the lists was methodical, almost gentle, like someone ticking off boxes on a to-do list. The oddest thing about all of that was that none of the men ever did anything overtly violent to me. They left notes, or they hung back, or they mentioned my car as if it were a common fact and not a private little beacon. They violated boundaries in small ways, the way a rat nibbles a wall until the whole structure trembles. Sometimes the violation is just knowing. I started to change small habits. I moved my car farther down the block. I put a cheap steering wheel lock on. I left the porch light on more often. I stopped taking long routes when I worked alone. Practical things. Practical things are comforting. They belong to a world with cause and effect. But human minds don't like the gaps. We fill them. A friend, Jenna, who worked nights at the hospital, told me a story about a similar tinkering at the edges of her life. There was a guy, she said, who called the ER and asked about a woman who wasn't even admitted yet. He described a green coat and a scar behind the ear. He knew details that made me lock the break room door. She told it like a confession. We ended up calling security. They checked the cameras. No one on the footage. Just blank minutes where motion ought to have been. We compared notes in that cheap, defensive way of people trying not to be hunted by coincidence. It made us bristle at strangers, but it also made us talk like investigators. We kept lists. We counted the number of times things happened with no sensible explanation. Some nights, you'd find comfort in that counting, like a child alphabetizing monsters to make them less terrifying. The last incident I will tell you about is the one that forced me to choose between a life of quiet vigilance and a life of letting things be. I was returning from a 2-day out-of-town shift. The highway at 2 in the morning is a study in isolation. Stations powerless, truck stops asleep, the world shrumped to brake lights and radio static. I was tired and my mind was scraping at the sides of sleep. Somewhere near the county line, my phone buzzed with a single line. "We know it's yours. The green Corolla, dent on the rear, park under the sycamore." It is wild how a single sentence can unmoor you. The note did not name me, it did not sign off, it simply assumed. Whoever sent it knew enough to put together the pattern, the car, the dent, the sycamore. They didn't need to know my name to unsettle me. I slowed down. I told myself to ignore it. I told myself that anyone with a phone could guess details if they'd done their homework. But the line, "We know it's yours," sat there like a verdict. I pulled into the next rest area and sat with my hands on the wheel, palms damp. The rest area lights hummed like something alive. A man in a dark coat sat on the far bench, head down, like a dog in the rain. I felt ridiculous, of course I did. Logic is a stubborn thing. You stand in its light and the irrational things look like bad neighbors. Inconvenient, noisy, annoying, not the end of the world. But the rational has limits when someone is watching the things that make your life yours. I drove the rest of the way home like a man with a remit. I locked the doors before I left the truck. I had a list of sensible actions: call the police, install motion lights, vary your routine. I did them. I also made a more embarrassing choice. I parked the truck under the sycamore anyway and left the key in the ignition to test someone. It was stupid and dangerous in equal measure. I told myself it was an experiment. The word stupid felt small compared to afraid. At 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed again. "Nice to see you followed directions," it said. My heart is an animal you can read like a clock when it starts to run. Fast, then slower, then worse. The bench across the rest area held a figure, thin, a coat that caught the light, and he stood as I watched. He looked directly at me, and he raised a hand, just once, in a mock salute. I got out of the truck slowly, hands visible. He smiled in a way that made no sense. There was no malice in it, not the kind you can name. There was only the deliberate, businesslike air of someone closing a file. He walked toward me. Up close, he smelled like the antiseptic elevator air and cold cigarettes. He put a folded paper on the hood of the truck. "We keep track," he said. "Helps the work." When I asked, "What work?" his lips twitched. "Just watching. Sometimes we leave notes." "Why me?" I asked. My voice was not steady. There was an odd tenderness to fury at that hour. He shrugged. "You leave lights on," he said. "You use the same spaces. You're easy to file." He looked at me with something like pity. "It isn't about you." He left before the police came. Someone had finally called them. A woman had reported a man loitering. The officers arrived in pairs, lights low and professional. They took my statement with that strange blend of care and bureaucracy, forms to fill, boxes to tick. They asked about whether I wanted to press charges. I didn't. What could I press? For what, exactly? For being observed? For an implied threat? They said they'd try to increase patrols. They suggested installing cameras. They were kind. Weeks later, there was a dent in my passenger door, low and round, like someone had pushed something heavy into the metal and walked away. There was a smear of dark on the edge of the dent that could have been mud or could have been blood. The police marked it in their report as substance present. I drove the vehicle to the shop and sat on the bench in the lobby like a man waiting for a hearing. The mechanic looked up, offered a cigarette, and said, "People notice patterns. I see it all the time. Folks who leave their cars easy, they get picked at." He didn't mean the organized thing I feared. He meant the small thefts, the opportunistic hands. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was always simpler than the dread I fed myself. But a pattern is not only what happens, it's how it feels to be the one it's happening to. Even if the men who circled my life were only opportunists, their attention was not neutral. Attention is an action with consequences. I stopped parking under the sycamore. I moved my car every night. I changed my route to work. I bought a small dash camera and left a sticker in the window announcing its presence. Most of the time, that sticker did more for my spirits than it did for anything else. Friends argued for varying degrees of explanation. Jenna said it sounded like a gang of petty observers. Ramon swore it was someone who loved the game of watching. My father said, with his practical anger, if they want a pretty sit-down, they can pick a fight on my porch. He drove around the block like a man warding off spirits with his steering wheel. The strangest aftertaste of those nights is the way normal things began to taste off. Driving home with all the ordinary rules felt now like a practiced routine observed by an audience you couldn't see. The green Corolla became less a car than a target painted by habit. I caught myself checking the glove box obsessively, not because it mattered, but because the act of checking felt like resisting being predictable. People have suggested explanations since then, some plausible, some creative. A neighbor who works nights could have been selling route tips. A camera crew could have been doing a prank show. The most flattering theory is that I'm special in someone's notes. The most chilling is that I'm sample data, enough to study. None of these theories satisfy. The argument that fits the facts often leaves the feelings unaddressed. When a thing happens repeatedly, you learn to catalog it without surrendering to it. You make a list of what to do and what not to do. You learn how much to tell other people without making them worry. You find ways to protect the edges of your life while leaving the center, your job, your needs, your friends, intact. In the end, what stuck with me wasn't the methods of the men or their motives. It was the knowing itself. He knew my ride before I booked it. Whoever he was, he involved himself in the map of my life, claiming corners I thought belonged only to me. He did it gently, with notes and folded paper and offhanded comments that sounded like advice. He did it so often that the amusement drained out of it and something colder took its place. I don't have a tidy ending. The men didn't get caught. The police did what they could. I installed cameras and lights. I changed my patterns. I told the stories at the bar and heard similar things in return. People will tell you that the world is mostly mundane and that most fear is misdirected. That's true in a way that doesn't help you when someone leaves a note about the place you park your car. What I did learn is how to live with the watching. I learned to park in different spots. I learned to make noise, literal noise, like an air horn blast when I felt watched on a dark street. I learned that practical measures ease the mind, even if they do not erase the knowledge that someone, if they want, map you. I also learned that the knowledge itself, the idea that a stranger could anticipate your choices, changes how you move through the world in a way a dent never could. Sometimes, on drives home, when the fog sits like a curtain and the road feels like a narrow throat, I think about the man who folded the note and the van that matched my truck down the highway. I think about the notebooks they keep, if they keep them at all, the lists with addresses and times and little checkboxes. I picture them filing me under a neat label: green Corolla, dent on rear bumper, leaves light on when parking, easy to find. The last time my phone buzzed with a message like that, I did something I hadn't done before. I replied. The message read, as they often did, "We saw you tonight. Good choices." I typed back, "Who are you?" For a long time, there was nothing. Then, someone who notices patterns. Then, after a pause that felt like the gap of a breath, we try to keep it small. I sat in my car, engine off, the world condensed into the glow of my phone. There was no more to say. The reply didn't make it less strange. It made it, if anything, more deliberate. If you're driving home tonight and your phone pings with a line that guesses a habit of yours, consider changing your route. Turn on a porch light. Tell someone where you're parking. These aren't heroic actions. They're the sort of practical things a person clings to when the world feels a fraction less private than it used to. And if you ever find a folded note on your car hood that says, simply, "We know," put it somewhere safe. Keep the paper. Let it be a small record of the time your ordinary life bent toward the uncanny. Tell someone, file the memory like a dent, something that marks you but does not define you. I still drive at night. I still park under trees sometimes, because habit is a stubborn thing, and because not every threat is real. I still keep a cheap steering wheel lock in the trunk. I still roll down the window when someone flags me and check the face of whoever's asking for a ride. I keep telling these stories because telling them is a way not to let them fold you. Sharing them doesn't fix the dent, or the smear, or the way the light of a street lamp can feel like an accusation. It does, however, make the watcher less invisible. So if you hear that sentence, "He knew my ride before I even booked it," know that it's not just about cars. It's about patterns, about what it means when someone maps the small, predictable choices that make you, you. It's about learning that attention, even if it hides behind the plainest of statements, is its own kind of trespass. And it's about holding on to the small acts that keep you moving. I haven't stopped watching the road. I haven't stopped leaving lights on sometimes, if only to see who notices. And there are nights when, driving past the bakery or the sycamore, I wonder if someone is writing my name in a notebook with a margin note, "File under easy." The thought doesn't let me sleep sometimes, but neither does the resolve to keep going. If you want more stories like this, more nights, more roads, more people who notice, subscribe, like the video, and leave your own experience in the comments. Tell me if you've ever found a note, a dent, or a man who knew your way home before you remembered it yourself. I read them all, and sometimes the comments map out patterns I never saw coming. Thanks for staying with me through these. Drive safe.